If you were queer in the late 80s, the internet wasn't yet a place. It was an idea, an experimental network of terminals and telephone lines that connected a few lucky weirdos. But for CM Ralph, it was a lifeline. This is the story of a murder mystery, a trench coat, a dyke detective, and a forgotten floppy disk that became one of the most important queer games ever made. Welcome to the Point & Quest podcast. I'm Lindsay, and this is our Pride special, Caper in the Castro. Caper in the Castro was released in 1989. Not sold, but distributed. Peer-to-peer, one floppy disk at a time. Or via BBS. Or email if you were lucky and very patient. It was the early internet equivalent of passing a handwritten zine in a smoky basement bar. For younger listeners, a floppy disk is like if you trapped a web page in a coaster and made it cry every time you asked it to load a file. Games in that era didn't come from an app store or Steam. You got them from hobbyists clubs, mailing lists, library bulletin boards, sometimes even by mailing $5 in a stamped envelope to someone you met in a Usenet forum. It was messy. It was human. It helped Caper in the Castro survive. A queer woman named CM Ralph, originally from San Francisco, made it using HyperCard, a visual programming tool on early Mac computers. Now, just for clarity, I'm not exactly sure what pronouns Ralph uses today. In past articles, it's she pronouns, she, her pronouns, though some sources vary slightly and use they pronouns. So out of respect, I'm going to do my best to honor that uncertainty while celebrating her contribution to queer gaming history. Oh, hi, how's it going? This is Lindsay from the future. I had to pop back on here and say that I found a more current artist statement circa 2023, courtesy of archive.org, that clarifies CM's pronouns, where they state, "I regret the spelling errors found in game. I am mildly dyslexic and suck at spelling." Same. "Back in 1988, I had no one to edit my writing. I also regret some of the more cringeworthy humor that is inappropriate by today's standards. In some older video reviews as well as interviews, people have used the pronouns she and her when describing me. I am transgender, and my preferred pronouns are they, them, and their." So there we have it, folks. I should have done better and realized this sooner. So please forgive my misuse of pronouns and refer to CM as they and them. Thanks. The game wasn't just a tech experiment. It was activism. The included README text file asked players to pass it along and, if possible, donate to an AIDS charity. Ralph coined a new term for it, charityware. So not shareware, it was more careware. Tell me that's not the most beautiful punk rock thing you've ever heard from a floppy disk. And that call, donate to an AIDS organization, wasn't symbolic. It was immediate. It was necessary. Because in 1989, the AIDS epidemic had devastated queer communities. Thousands upon thousands of lives were lost in the US alone. And the government's response? Cruel indifference and even grotesque humor about the situation.
A mystery disease known as the gay plague has become an epidemic unprecedented in the history of American medicine. That today from the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta. Topping the list of likely victims are male homosexuals who have many partners and drug users who inject themselves with needles. Medical experts say the disease kills 4 out of every 10 people it strikes and that it threatens to explode in the nation's cities.
So games like this became small acts of rebellion. Proof that we could still create art, still tell stories, and still look out for each other. It was a point-and-click mystery starring Tracker McDyke, a private detective trying to find her missing friend, a drag queen named Tessie LaFemme. But it was also a mirror. It reflected the joy, fear, and defiance of a community refusing to vanish. Okay, let's slow it down for a moment, because you really can't talk about Caper and the Castro without talking about the context in which it was created. The late 1980s weren't just neon and new wave. For queer people, especially in cities like San Francisco, it was a time of grief, rage, and survival. The AIDS crisis had already claimed tens of thousands of lives. By the end of the decade, that number would rise into the hundreds of thousands. And the Reagan administration, they barely spoke a word. Public funding lagged, stigma soared, families disowned their own. And across the country, queer communities were left to care for each other, alone. C.M. Ralph was living in the Bay Area when she made the game. She described that era as a very dark time. Friends were dying, entire communities were disappearing, and mainstream media either ignored it or blamed us. So Caper and the Castro wasn't just a mystery game. It was a coded transmission, a grayscale act of resistance, a digital quilt square sewn into the underground web of queer care and memory. The idea of careware wasn't branding. It was personal. The README file asked users to send money to their local AIDS organizations instead of paying the developer. This was about keeping each other alive, one download at a time. And it worked. The game was shared across early BBS forums and floppy swaps. Queer gamers and allies passed it along, sometimes not even knowing who made it, just that it was one of ours, and that it mattered. This wasn't just a video game. It was mutual aid, and it had pretty cool pixel art. It's 3:05 a.m. The phone rings. It's your friend, your old friend, Tessie LaFemme, a drag queen and fixture of the Castro. She sounds frantic. There's urgency in her voice as she begs you to meet her in front of the game room, one of your favorite local haunts. She says she's got the goods on Dulligan Straight Man, the city's most notorious landlord and deeply closeted villain. But just as she's about to explain more, the line goes dead. Tessie vanishes. You are Tracker McDyke, a world-famous lesbian private investigator. You don't just want to find Tessie, you have to. She's family. She's one of the last people holding your community together. And something tells you this isn't just about a missing person. This is where Caper and the Castro begins. The game drops you into a moody, Macintosh-era noir world rendered in black and white stippling. You don't get tutorials or quest logs. You get a trench coat, a .38 revolver, and a street map of the Castro. Your cursor becomes your toolkit, a lighter, a magnifying glass, binoculars, a notebook. You're not just pointing and clicking. You're shooting to open doors, digging through potted plants, deciphering notes scattered across the city. You're navigating sabotage, conspiracy, and biological warfare, all wrapped in queer-coded locations and language. And if you mess up, the game doesn't hold your hand. Walk up those creaky stairs, die. Drink the wrong wine, die instantly from a bacterial virus. Knock on the wrong door, get blown back. One wrong move can end the game. Your search takes you through pixel art of a 1980s queer San Francisco block. The gay apparel clothing store, now burned and sabotaged. Club 102, where the wine has been tainted. The Red Herring Cafe, a pun-laden diner where the fish talks back. Even Tessie's car becomes a crime scene. Her trunk stuffed with $50,000 and a murdered undercover cop. And with each step forward, you begin to unravel a horrifying plot. Dulligan Straight Man and his ally, Landon LaDouche, a clear parody of Lyndon LaRouche, are trying to shut down gay spaces. You find maps marking quarantine zones across the Castro, invoices for sabotage jobs from one company called Joe's Carpentry, and crates marked medical supplies being delivered to local clubs. The plan? A targeted biological attack. Not just to kill, but to erase. Sound familiar? It should, because while Caper and the Castro may play like a noir detective game, its real-world context is heartbreakingly clear. This was made, as stated before, during the height of the AIDS epidemic, And its story? A virus weaponized against queer populations? Of silence from the state? And of people forced to protect their own? Mirrors reality all too closely. But this is also a story of resistance and of community. The game lets you solve the case, but not by going it alone. You find whiskey and a lighter and you burn it all down, just in time to rescue Tessie, who's been chained in the dark beneath a bar. It's dramatic, it's messy, it's DIY, it's so queer. And it's exactly how we survived the AIDS crisis. Queer people looked after their own. And let me be clear, this isn't a melodrama, it's an allegory. The whole game is a love letter to the way queer folk survive when power ignores or attacks us. We make our own spaces. We sneak, we code, we break in, we flood the damn bathroom if we have to. There are about 20 screens total, depending on how you count. No voice acting and no real cutscenes, just slow, deliberate movement. Each click revealing a world that's both bigger and more intimate than the first. And all of it is set in a pixel art version of San Francisco's Castro district. Next, we go there. Okay, so you know how insufferable writers will sometimes be like, oh, the city isn't just a setting, it's a character in itself. Well, I'm going to be insufferable for a moment, because San Francisco's Castro district is more than a setting. It is a character. It breathes, it mourns, it marches, it dances. In Caper and the Castro, you don't just visit a fictional street. You explore a lovingly stylized version of a real place. The Castro in the late 80s. Bars with names like The Stud, bookstores and bathhouses, art galleries that doubled as community bulletin boards, and alleys that held both danger and joy. This wasn't random design. C.M. Ralph was living in San Francisco at the time, and the Castro was the heart of queer resistance and community. Harvey Milk had opened his camera shop here. Marches, visuals, protests regularly spilled through the streets. It was beautiful, it was brutal, and it was home. You can kind of think of the Castro like a queer Atlantis. Part sanctuary, part battlefield, all very mythical. And while Caper and the Castro simplifies geography into a point-and-click screen, the feeling is unmistakable. This is a game by someone who knew the textures of the place, the clang of the Muni streetcar, the smell of strong coffee and stronger opinions. You don't just investigate a mystery. You retrace the footprints of an entire generation. Ralph built the game using HyperCard, which meant that every scene had to be layered and coded by hand. That constraint created a kind of poetry. Every line had weight. Every strip of dialogue was deliberate. Even the navigation feels like a metaphor. You click through the Castro one room at a time, uncovering pieces of the world that refuses to stay buried. So I'm going to San Francisco this summer, and of course I'm taking my wife. It's going to be her first trip there, and we are definitely going to the Castro district. I guess it's a sort of pilgrimage in a way. Years and years have passed, but it still remains a safe and vibrant queer space. Like a lot of queer art from the 80s, Caper and the Castro nearly disappeared. C.M. Ralph moved on from the game industry. She took other jobs. The original files sat on a dusty desk, tossed into a drawer like many memories from that time. And let's be real, half of queer history lives in forgotten filing cabinets and mislabeled folders. For years, the game was considered lost. Some people remembered playing it, but no one could find a copy. Even Ralph herself didn't think anyone had it. Then, in the mid-2010s, a digital archivist named Adrian Shaw, a professor at Temple University and founder of the LGBTQ Game Archive, tracked it down. I bet she could give Tracker McDyke a run for her money. Ralph found the original floppy and sent it in. Shaw had the disc imaged and preserved. In interviews since then, Ralph has reflected on the emotional weight of recovering the game, of seeing people play it again, of realizing that decades later, it still mattered. She was making a detective game, sure, but she was also leaving a trail. And now, you can play it. Like right now, the preserved version is hosted online by the Internet Archive. It runs in browser, no downloads needed, no $5 bills or stamped envelopes. Just a few clicks and you're walking the streets of a pixelated Castro, solving the case that started it all. So many queer works didn't survive the AIDS crisis, or the apathy of major archives, or the rapid shift from floppies to CDs to digital storefronts. But this one did, because people remembered, because people looked, because people cared. All right, so let's zoom out a bit and talk about archiving, remembering, and why queer memory matters. Here's the thing about queer history. It's often undocumented, misfiled, or deliberately erased. And that's not a poetic exaggeration. That's just a fact. Libraries didn't collect zines, museums didn't collect queer games, and archives, they often labeled queer creators as anonymous or filed them under euphemisms. So when a game like Caper in the Castro resurfaces, it is so much more than just nostalgia. It's reclamation. Adrian Shaw's work with the LGBTQ Game Archive reminds us that digital media, especially queer media, is fragile. Floppy disks degrade. Hypercard stacks disappear. Domains lapse. Entire communities can vanish overnight when the server goes down. Here's a little aside. The Wayback Machine is one of my favorite things on the internet. It's basically digital archaeology. Instead of pottery sherds, we get broken HTML and blink tags. And yet, it's still amazing to explore. You can navigate dozens and dozens of old websites, and the people who have preserved them, just thank you so much. That's why preservation isn't just academic, it's revolutionary. The LGBTQ Game Archive doesn't just list games, it contextualizes them. It makes them searchable. It treats them like they matter. Which historically is rare. And when CM Ralph's game was finally uploaded to the Internet Archive, it wasn't for novelty or nostalgia. It was a digital act of survival. A reminder that queer people have always been here. Coding, designing, storytelling, even when nobody was watching. And the context in which the game was made really matters. It was a time in history that so many people have come to forget. Today, you can play Caper in the Castro on modern browsers thanks to emulation and dedicated archivists. Which isn't just cool, it's political, really. Because every time someone plays it, shares it, or talks about it, they're keeping history alive. We'll never recover everything we've lost, but we can damn well fight for what's left. Okay, so I kind of took liberties here when describing Miss La Femme, but drag mothers were and are still pillars of the community, and I'd be willing to bet Tessie was one of the good ones. Tessie La Femme was the heart of her community, a drag queen, a performer, a local legend. She held space the way so many queer elders did, by being loud, loving, and impossible to ignore. She was the person people went to when they didn't know where else to go. She was chosen family, a mother, the kind you danced with, grieved with, got kicked out of bars with, and always called when something went wrong. So when Tessie goes missing, the silence is deafening. No media frenzy, no big search party, just another queer life vanished in a city already losing too many. And that's not noir storytelling. That's history. That's what happened. During the AIDS crisis, it wasn't the government or hospitals or churches taking care of people. It was lovers, friends, bartenders, drag mothers, ACT UP chapters. It was queer folks creating underground caregiving networks, renting out apartments to isolate the sick, sneaking food and meds past hospital staff who wouldn't touch gay patients. holding hands when there were no families left to call. People like the lesbian caregivers of the 1980s who stepped in when no one else would. In cities like San Francisco and New York, it was often lesbian nurses, activists, and friends who bathed dying men, cleaned their apartments, picked up their prescriptions, and stood by their hospital beds even when biological families wouldn't. One nurse, Mary Fisher, said it bluntly. It was mostly lesbians keeping the boys alive. Groups like the Lesbian Avengers weren't just marching in the streets. They were driving friends to appointments, doing late-night welfare checks, organizing food drives, and forming buddy systems that stretched across city blocks. In some hospitals, entire AIDS wings were unofficially staffed by lesbian volunteers. And they didn't do it for glory. They did it because someone had to. And then there were the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence in San Francisco, queer nuns in full drag offering hospice care and distributing safe sex kits when the city wouldn't. And yeah, we still had allies back then. People like Ruth Coker Burks, a straight woman in Arkansas who buried over 40 men herself when families wouldn't claim them. Or the people sewing panels for the AIDS memorial quilt, stitching grief into fabric, carrying memory when the system wouldn't. And in Caper and the Castro, you play Tracker McDyke, a queer woman looking for her friend when no one else will. Tessie was beloved, and in real life, beloved didn't mean protected. It meant you had to show up. It meant being the one who brought the soup, called the morgue, made the flyers, wrote the names down so they wouldn't be forgotten. Tessie LaFemme mattered. She mattered in a way so many queer people have always mattered. Because we say so. Because we carry each other. Because we refuse to let one another disappear. And Caper and the Castro, for all its pulp detective flair, reflects that. Tessie isn't a damsel in distress. She's the kind of person whose disappearance shakes a whole neighborhood. She's flamboyant, funny, beloved. A danger to those in power, precisely because she talks too much, knows too much, and because she won't go quietly. And that name, Tessie LaFemme, it's not just camp, it's legacy. Just like Tracker McDyke isn't some random name. It's defiant, it's bold. It dares you to say it out loud. Like every good piece of queer art from the 80s, this game hides in plain sight, using humor and innuendo to mask a message sharp enough to draw blood. As you play, the names get louder, queer, more ridiculous. But for all its unabashedly queer glory, Caper and the Castro had a sanitized version, Murder on Main Street, a straight-washed version of the game Ralph developed to appeal to a broader audience, so she could sell it to publishers. Because, let's be real, no one was going to buy a game with a lesbian detective and a kidnapped drag queen in 1989. So she straightened it out. Tracker McDyke became a generic detective. Tessie LaFemme replaced with a generic damsel. The setting, no longer the vibrant, real Castro, just some nondescript city street. The edge, the soul, the queerness, gone. But let's remember, before the term queer indie game dev existed, before Steam or itch.io, or even the concept of shareware as we know it, Caper and the Castro was released as something called charityware. But the reality of 1989 was complicated. As meaningful as Caper and the Castro was within the queer networks it reached, Ralph knew it had a pretty small chance of reaching a mainstream audience, the kind that might actually have enough resources to donate at scale. So she made a version that could. It's kind of like making a queer zine and then printing a version for your church newsletter with all the good stuff removed. Despite what some may think, Ralph wasn't selling out. She was trying to get into the market, into homes, into places that wouldn't touch a queer game, but might, unknowingly, play one in disguise. If someone fell in love with Murder on Main Street and later discovered the original, well, that's even better. This wasn't just about access, it was about survival. Because Ralph had a vision that was bigger than one audience. And let's be honest, there was no Patreon back then, no GoFundMe links in bios. If you wanted your project to raise funds for AIDS relief in 1989, you had to be clever. You had to Trojan horse it. Murder on Main Street wasn't a betrayal of Caper and the Castro. It was a decoy. A decoy in a trench coat. The puzzles in Caper and the Castro aren't exactly polished, and they're not exactly groundbreaking. They're clunky, unpredictable, sometimes wildly unfair by modern standards, but they're still really fun nonetheless. Because every riddle, every scrambled message, every code you have to crack feels like it's speaking the language of survival. So let's start with the most famous one, the cipher. At one point, you find a piece of paper covered in nonsense. No hints, no key, just letters on a page. But over the course of the game, you start gathering little substitution clues. E equals O, B equals R, Q equals T, and so on and so forth. Eventually, if you stick with it, and you're either extremely clever or extremely desperate, the whole thing reveals itself. That scrambled message translates into behind port. That's the big reveal. There's a hidden door behind a port shelf in the final room. And if you don't solve this, you can't rescue Tessie, and you'll never know what happened to her. You'll be stuck in the dark. And look, maybe I'm reading too much into it. Actually, I know I'm reading too much into it because that's kind of what I do. But this is queer storytelling. Secrets coded into symbols spread across a world that doesn't want you to find the truth. And you piece it together anyway. Because you can't be stopped. Now, other puzzles are much more tactile. You lockpick one door, but then you just shoot the rest of them open, which is kind of fun. You don't use a search command, you use binoculars to spy through a window and reveal secret scenes, some spicier than others. There is even a moment where you swim through the toilet vent to sneak into the villain's office. It's campy, but also really fun. But it's not a neat and tied up ending. It's kind of sort of bittersweet. The sense is, this time we saved each other, but they'll try again. It's detective fiction, sure, but it's also kind of a survival manual, like how to protect your people in a world that wants them gone, pixel by pixel. So now here we are, at the end of a mystery, a story, a rediscovery, but also maybe the beginning of something new. Caper and the Castro isn't just the first known queer computer game. It's a blueprint. It's a reminder that queer people have always used whatever tools we had, whether HyperCard, protest signs, floppy disks, to carve out space in worlds that weren't built for us. And the games, the stories, they were powerful. They're systems. They're survival. They let us test ethics, break rules, build futures. When the real world fails us, games say, let's try again. Tracker McDyke didn't just search for her friend. She modeled a world where queer women were heroes, where drag queens were worth fighting for, when systems could be hacked and justice could be re-evaluated. And that matters. We are living in a similar time. A time where queer rights are still debated, where trans people are still fighting for a shred of dignity, where history is still being erased, and people along with it. And that's why we need stories like this, unearthed, preserved, shouted from every digital rooftop. So play the game, tell a friend, burn it to a new kind of floppy, a tweet, a TikTok, a podcast, a lesson plan, keep it alive. Because Caper and the Castro isn't just retro, it's resistance. It's the archive in your hands. And sometimes the most radical thing you can do is press play. Thanks for listening to the Point and Quest podcast. I'm Lindsay, and until next time, be safe, be seen, and remember, history doesn't just happen. We keep it alive.